All right, as we get ready for lesson 10.4, let me just remind you of a couple things. The biggest thing with a frequency distribution is making sure that you can come up with the correct mean, median, mode, and range. So be careful there. And when we have a quiz on Wednesday, those are the ones that are going to get some of you, and they're going to get you in a number of questions. Because if I give you a frequency distribution and you're not realizing that the frequency tells you how many of that number, then you're going to probably miss the mode, you're probably going to miss the mean, you're probably going to miss the median, and you might even miss the range. So just be careful with a frequency distribution. So the point of all that is, come Tuesday, getting ready for Wednesday, make sure you look at this key example right here. Okay, it's the first one we did with a frequency distribution because that's the norm in the way you'd see it. And from that, you got to get those pieces of information. So be careful there. Be careful, be careful, be careful. All right, hopefully you're reviewing all your stuff. And that'll be great, and hopefully you're learning as you go because now we got to deal with bar graphs. All right, so let me get my shade up and then we will roll. Okay, different kinds of graphs are used to illustrate different aspects of the data. And again, a person that is up with all the latest graphing techniques depends on what data they want to display and how they want to display that data as to what they will use. All right, so we're going to talk about a bar graph today. We're going to talk about a broken line graph today. And then tomorrow we'll talk about a circle graph. All right, whenever making a bar graph, a broken line graph, a histogram, a pie chart, make sure you use a clear descriptive title. So a clear descriptive title is very important. Titles are usually bold and titles are usually capitalized, yes? So that's the way you want to make your title. When you have to make a bar graph or a broken line graph, make sure you give a nice capitalized, bold's a little hard to do in using pencil or whatever, but again, you might want to press a little harder and make that title look nice, all right? You want a clear descriptive title. Please remember the idea of a graph is for an individual to look at it without any instruction and know what's going on. And the people that write good graphs, that's the case. Somebody can look at their graph and understand exactly what's going on from the graph. Those that have poor graphs, it's not so easy. And you definitely need a title to be able to know what's going on, that's for sure. All right, B, the viewer should be able to, again, as I just said, understand the graph without any or very little other written instruction. And that's your goal. Have you guys heard the adage, a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? And that's the idea. You want your graph to be a picture that then helps the person understand exactly what's going on. All right, number 2. A bar graph, first kind of graph we're going to talk about, is used to show a comparison of quantities or amounts in a specific category. A comparison. So the idea of a bar graph is, by a quick glance, you get an idea of how things compare. The taller the bar, the more, right? And so if you look at this graph, it's got a title, Adult Unemployment in the Nordic Countries, 2008. All right, so we know what's going on. We know it's an old graph, it's 2008. We also know it's adult unemployment, and we may not know what Nordic countries mean, but when we look at the bottom label, the bars are labeled, aren't they? And notice the word Denmark. You know, this every graphing program and stuff does things a little bit differently. If I were doing this, this would be a line. If you were on graph paper, your lines would be right here. And the word Denmark would be between those lines. You'd have further lines here. Some graphing programs, people get smart and they think they know better. And you got lines here. By the way, notice, oops, I'm off on that one. Notice that the spacing between each bar is uniform. It's the same amount, right? We don't have like 2 spaces between the first and second bars and 4 spaces between the third and fourth bars, right? It's all the same. Notice the width of each bar. Isn't the width of each bar the same width? Right? Do you see that? I mean, is the first bar any wider than the second bar? No. Is the second bar and the third bar the same width? Yeah. Are all the bars the same width? Yeah. That's the way yours ought to be. And I've seen it different. I've seen students make like the first bar 1 width and the second bar is like 3 width. Well, no. Keep them the same width. All right. The label, notice, goes between the lines because it's the bar. Label between the lines because it's the bar, between the lines. Not only does it say the country down below, and now you know the Nordic countries, but it also says country. All right, it's not a big deal. I think we all know that Iceland is a country, but sometimes you won't know what it represents, and so that's good. Notice the scale on the left-hand side. Bar graphs are supposed to start at 0. They're supposed to start at 0. So you can do things with the scale, but you should start at 0 for a bar graph. It should start at 0. Now this one's doing percent, but it could have just as easily been numbers. And again, we would start at 0. And you're going to try to get a scale that will show the difference in heights of the bars. Okay? What if instead of going up by 1%, right? So this is like, this first line is 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%, 5%, 6%, and the top is 7%. What if instead each line was like 5%? Now your bars are going to be closer together because you made the scale too large. You got to be careful with that. You got to come up with a good scale that will show the difference in the heights of the bars. So you got to start at 0. But don't make your scale, some students don't want, their graph to be this big. They don't want to use that much graph paper like it's really expensive or something. And so instead of going by 2s, they go by 10s. But their graph doesn't really show the difference in heights because they went by 10s instead of by 2s. Or maybe they went by 20s instead of by 5s. You want to pick a scale that's going to really show as much as you can the difference in height. Now again, if you got one bar that's really gigantic, you got to be careful because you can't go off your paper with your graph. But you do have a lot of blocks. And again, notice how that scale is also labeled with the unemployment rate. Now notice one other thing that this bar graph does that I always want our bar graphs to do, and that's to put the total on top. Not all bar graphs will do this. We will do this on all our bar graphs. We will put the total on top. This now allows the person to clearly see what the actual number was because sometimes it's not so clear. And so we will put our totals on top. When we do that, then we've got a good bar graph. Okay, so let me show you the next one, and we'll go through all that stuff again. So here's the second example. All right, we got a clear title, fruit sales. It's bold, it's capitalized, right? It's in the top, it's in the middle of the top. Now, down below we have what each bar represents. Now again, this is a computer-generated program, so it doesn't really show. If you were on graph paper, you'd have a line right here and a line right here. I'm not going to go through and draw them all in again. But notice the word apple is between the 2 lines that define the width of your bar. Do you follow? Because the bar is apples. And notice there's a space between the red bar and the yellow bar. And it's the same space between every bar. Do you see that? You want that. You don't want different spaces. Now, the space between the bar is less than the size of each bar. That's okay. Or it can be the size of each bar. Let's say you're on graph paper and you're only using 1 block for a bar. Well, then you're probably going to use 1 block between each bar for the space. And let me pause and say this. Somebody, when we were going over homework for the histogram, said, hey, this person used spaces in between their bars. Is that right or wrong? That's wrong for a histogram. Histogram uses no spaces between the bar. Technically, a bar graph uses spaces between the bar. It just helps distinguish the kind of graph as well. Notice all the bars are uniform. That's good. Notice our left scale starts at 0 like it ought to. And you can see this one goes by 10. Now, when you're on graph paper, you'll have these horizontal lines going across, right? Notice how the number is across from the line because the line is 10, right? The number's not between lines. The line is 10. And that's the case going all the way up. Notice that there's a label on the scale. And now we see that this is sales sum, so the adding of the sales. Now, one thing it doesn't have that I want us to always have is the number on top. So on top of this bar, stick a 40. On top of this bar, stick a 60. Now, if I were doing this bar graph, I would have one more line higher before I made that top border, so my 60 would be inside the border. Do you follow? Does it make sense? So what I'm talking about is this black line right here, I wouldn't have there. I would have it higher, and I'd have my title above it, so the 60 would be below. Do you follow? All right, let me get rid of that. Okay, and the purple one, the number on top of that is 30, and the orange one is 50, and the green one is 25. So again, when we do bar graphs, we're always going to include those numbers on the top. If you use Microsoft Word and some other programs, sometimes they'll give you a key. But even though there's a key, we need to label our bars because, again, you want it at a quick glance, the person to understand your bar graph. Any questions on that? Anybody on that bar graph? Okay, so I think we got one to make, right? So let's make a bar graph of the data. HCS weekly lunchroom sales. Nuggets 20, hot dogs 10, and grilled cheese 24. All right, so how are you going to do this? And let me get my page smaller so you guys can see it better. Okay. So what are you going to do with this? First off, you got to decide on a scale. And so I need to decide on a scale, and I need to decide where my left corner is going to be. You know, I'm looking at this thing, and I'm thinking I'm going to put my left corner like right here. I'm just going to put a little bit there to mark my left corner. All right, 0 is on the bottom, and I need to decide, what am I going to go by? If I go by ones, I don't have enough space, do I? And you don't either. So I could go by 2s. Can I go 12? Because I got to get it all the way up to 24 and really above. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24. Boy, I can go by 2s. You know what? That's probably the best way. And I'm going to go by 2s. 2, 4, 6, 8. Notice I'm putting them on the line, right? 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24. And I'm not going to write anything further than that. I don't need to. Now I'm going to set up my right-hand side. Now remember, on a bar graph, we want to space first. All right, do you guys want to use 2 boxes for a bar? Or let's use 2 boxes. Why not? So let's go 1 box over. I'm going to put a line, and then I'm going to go 2 boxes and put a line. And between it, I'm going to write nuggets. And again, I'm going to try to write that nice. And let me mention something to you guys. Sometimes what you have to write won't fit in the space. So let me show you the proper way to write it. Let's say you have to write it sideways. If you did, it would go like this. That's the orientation. You wouldn't have the line underneath it. It would go that way. Oops. I've seen students doing it this way. This is wrong. That's not the proper orientation of the word. You say, does it matter? It matters. That's not the way it's supposed to go. It's supposed to go the other way. So if you got a big word and it's not going to fit well, you're going to have to do it sideways. Again, you would write it so that as you look, as you kind of go to the right and look over to the left, you can read it. That's the proper way. Again, this one fits though, nuggets. All right, we need a space, and then our 2-bar, and what's next? What else do we have? We've got hot dogs. You can use 2 words, right? I'm going hot dogs. And then a space. And then our next bar, grilled cheese, definitely 2 words. And then I need that last space. Now that I've got this, I'm ready to do my border. So watch. I'm going across. And I'm hitting that last spot. See, I laid all that out. And watch when I go up. I want to go up so that I go at least 1 bar higher than my 24. I can go a couple more, but I'm going at least 1. And I'm going to mark this other corner. And again, if I had a ruler, I'd be doing a ruler because I'm going to make my graph look really sharp. Because I'm excellent in everything I do, just like you are. Now, there's not a whole lot of labeling. You could say items as that scale. And the left scale, you would say sales. Notice again the orientation of that word. Now I wrote it sideways. You could write it straight, right? You could write it if you wanted to like this. You definitely have room. But if I'm going to write it sideways, it's going to orient that way, that proper direction. Okay? What else do we need? We need a title, right? And look, I don't know that you can get rid of any of these words. So HCS weekly lunchroom sales. For a descriptive title. And now it's just left to making the bars, right? And again, you can be colorful if you want. I like to mark the top of the bar first. And then again, I would use a straight edge and fill in the bar. I'm going to use sideways lines. If you're a color nut and you like the color, you can color it in, but that is time consuming. And I'm too high. Look at that. Any Kool-Aid for anybody? Oh, I can erase. It's awesome. Right. And you know what caught me that I was too high? Because remember, for our bars, we're always going to put the number on the top, and there are 20 nuggets, right? And that bar then should go to a height of 20. All right, I think I'll do my next bar in green. You can do whatever you want. Again, I'm going to mark the 10, the height, so I get my bar in the right place. And a 10 goes on top. And let's use black. Grilled cheese, the most popular item, 24. Again, normally I would use a straight edge, and you would too, because you want your graph to look nice. And the vertical lines fill the purpose, right? And a 24 on top. And there you go. And that's a good bar graph. It looks nice and orderly, right? It's got a title. It's got labels. Things are in the right place, Aaron. You don't really need a 0. Some like it. Some don't. You can have it or not for me. But make sure that your scale starts at 0. Okay. Some don't like to stick a 0 down there at the bottom, but you can have it. Either way is fine. Any other questions on that? Anybody? On the bar graph? So when you guys do one tonight, it's going to look pretty like that, right? Even better because you're going to use a ruler, right? Awesome. Okay. Second kind of graph is a broken line graph. Some just call them a line graph. Some call them a broken line graph. A broken line graph is used to show changes in value of the data. This is for changing data. A lot of times stock market quotes are done in a line graph or a broken line graph. All right, guys, notice the differences. Notice the differences. Do you see numbers above the dot? No. Bar graph, numbers go above the bar. Broken line graphs, you don't put numbers above the dot. Now, you might try to use like Microsoft Word, and it might try to put them there on purpose, but we don't use them. And generally, on a line graph, broken line graph, they're not there. Notice that there's a space before the first dot. You see that? You want your broken line graph to be like that as well. Notice there's a space after the last dot. You want your broken line graph to be like that as well. Notice the days of the week line up with the line, because it's not between the line that you're worried about for a bar, it's exactly on the line. And notice the first dot is on the line. And what does this tell us? 15 kilos of potatoes were consumed on Monday. I know that because I know it's potatoes consumed. I know that because it's Monday, and I know that the 15 is kilos, right? 15 kilos of potatoes were consumed on Monday. Again, notice Tuesday is right on the line, and the dot is on the line. Now we're up to 20. And on Wednesday, we're up to 30 kilos. And on Thursday, we're down to 10 kilos. I don't know why they don't like potatoes on Thursday, right? On Friday, you're up to 15 kilos, 25 kilos on Saturday, and we close out at 35 kilos on Sunday. Do you see the differences in that graph? So again, a bar graph, your labels are between the lines because it's the bar. But on a broken line graph, your labels are on the lines because the dot goes on the line. And the dot is the data. So if you were graphing it, you would set it up, you would put all your dots in, and then you would connect your dots with the line. Okay? You would connect your dots with a line. Nuances of a broken line graph. Occasionally, you can do two or more on the same graph. And again, Microsoft Word will do this for you. Excel will do this for you. But we don't have a title, so we're not exactly sure what's going on. We know it's savings in US dollars, and we know it's Jack and Barbara savings. Savings from what? We're not sure. Now, this broken line computer-generated graph is missing some key lines. Should be a line there for January. I would write these in. There should be a line there for February. There should be a line there for March. There should be a line there for April. And then the line there for May. Okay? Because again, the data goes right on the line. I would have put months down here, though we do know what those are. And again, there should have been some title. So we're not really 100% sure what's going on here because they didn't include a title. We would have if it's ours. Okay? Listen now, a broken line graph doesn't always have to start at 0. Do you get that? Not always start at 0. Because again, you want your broken line graph to show you the differences, ups and downs. And if you start at 0 sometimes, all your data won't be until you're like way up here, and then it'll all be scrunched together. You won't be able to tell. So you need your scale to be bigger. Like this goes by 500ths, and it works. But if the data was closer together and you went by 500ths, all the lines would look in a line. It would look like they're in a line. And you wouldn't want to start at 0. You'd want to start at close to the low number and a little above the high number and make your scale there so you can stretch it out so you can see the ups and downs. And it takes making a few for you to get that. All right, time's about up, so I got to stop there. All right, here's your homework for tonight. Again, I broke up what's there. So this is page 414. I want you to do 6 through 10, 12, 14, and 18. That's it for today. 6 through 10, 12, 14, and 18. Oh, and 6 through 10, no original graph. You don't need to draw the original graph on your paper and take that time. You'll need to read data off of it for 6 through 10, but you don't need to draw it on your homework paper, all right? We'll just open up our books tomorrow when we go over it. So that's 6 through 10, no original graph needed. I think 12, 14, and 18, I think you make ones for those. All right, do a good job. Make them look pretty.